Welcome to Dead But Not Gone, an estate planning podcast.
Welcome to Dead But Not Gone, an estate planning podcast with Miss Allison Phillips. Allison is a Texas estate planning attorney and founder of the Burns Phillip Law Firm, where she helps individuals and families make thoughtful decisions that keep the people they love out of court and out of conflict. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're talking about why estate planning becomes more complicated for blended families and how thoughtful planning can help prevent misunderstandings and conflict later on. Miss Allison, welcome back.
Hi, how are you, Evan?
I'm well. So this is an interesting topic. So what are some of the biggest estate planning issues that start to look different once a family includes, remarriage and stepchildren or children from prior relationships?
Well, the family dynamics change so much when it comes to those different types of relationships. And a lot of the times those dynamics can be very tenuous based on a relationship that one individual has with another individual, and it can change very quickly. So those types of situations are they're just a higher risk, I guess, that because there's a lot more emotions involved and different connections. So one of the things that I see a lot in blended families of things gone wrong is beneficiary designation planning. Maybe there wasn't an update to the beneficiary designations. They pass outside of probate, and beneficiary designations will trump a will. So maybe the person remembered to update their will, but did not remember to go back and check their beneficiary designations or their nominations. That's one that pops up too, like old guardianship documents for your minors naming your ex-in-laws as the guardians for your kids. That might not still be what your goals were, but they've never been updated. So when I mentioned the dynamics, whenever you go back and you start thinking about the dynamics, you got to always take that step and move away from, you no longer get that option of being able to say, my spouse will take care of everything. The surviving spouse is going to do the right thing by everybody, because now your surviving spouse might have other priorities and other motivations involved. And, you may believe that they'll take care of your kids, but with no legal obligation to do so, you're putting a lot of trust and faith in a person that may again remarry, and then they have a whole nother family. And, there's just different dynamics that can come in to surprise you, and you never know what the future is going to hold, and you never know what's going to happen next. So with blended families, it becomes so much more important to get in there and make sure that your babies are protected, that make sure that your new spouse is treated fairly. One of those, you were mentioning kind of what are some of the biggest estate planning issues. One of the biggest ones that I've seen has been the homestead.
Right.
Surviving spouse lives in the homestead that was the family home for decades, but maybe mom died earlier and new mom is living there, and new mom doesn't want them to leave. They've been there for decades, but now the kids own it. So, it can get kind of where you had a strong relationship. People's expectations changing can really influence that negatively.
So it kind of seems so, but why do these blended families often run into problems when estate plans are outdated or maybe created before that marriage even happened?
Yes. So estate plans always need to be kept up to date. I don't believe that an estate plan is a static solution. It has to be dynamic. Your life changes. Your family dynamic changes. Your assets change. Your goals change over years. I mean, if you'd asked me at 20 what my estate planning goals were versus now, you're not going to get the same answers. And if you treat your estate planning documents as a one and done tool that you can put on a shelf, then you're really doing a disservice to your loved ones. I mean, that's what happened in my family. Both of my grandfathers were widowed or divorced, and their wills were done before they lost their first wife. And they didn't account for new marriages, the buying and selling of property, the creation or dissolution of businesses, the transfer of assets within the family that happened over those decades from when the will was done. So that's why I build in plan reviews for my clients, because, come tell me what's going on in your life. We'll make sure it still works. If it doesn't work, then we'll change it. If it does still work, then good. Now you've been reminded what you did.
A lot of people assume everything will naturally work itself out after they pass away, but because everyone gets along now, everything's fine. Where does that assumption start creating risk for those blended families?
Well, the biggest assumption that I think I've mentioned it once already is my spouse will do the right thing down the road when it's time. And, you never know what's going to happen. This comes back to a very common theme that you'll hear me talking about a lot is that nobody knows how grief is going to affect people. And the way people react to grief is very, very different all the time. And because of that, priorities, motivations, and fears can all play a huge role in how things proceed after a death. And when you don't have strong enough documents, you don't have updated documents, or, it's probate or you haven't been able to create that clarity of what I own, what I want to happen to it, and what I want to happen to you. If you don't do all of that, then where that lack of communication comes in, and that's where you see litigation, disagreements, the no, that's mine, not yours, um, well, you behave this way, so I'm going to retaliate in this way, and it just gets ugly.
How do families usually handle these situations where someone wants to provide for a current spouse while also protecting an inheritance for children from a previous relationship?
It varies by the family and what kind of dynamic they want. Um, Trusts are an amazing tool for a blended family because you can really get very clear and execute a very, very thorough plan that, again, private, doesn't have to deal with court, and it is enforceable in court, but doesn't have to go through that process. Everybody knows what's going on. You can reserve protections for the spouse. You can make sure the kids stay protected. Income, principal, it all matters, and it can be very helpful for making sure everyone feels like they were recognized, that they were remembered, that they were loved. It's one of the things that you see a lot in grief situations is people going back and rethinking their memories and reconsidering their dynamic with the person who passed. Or maybe they didn't have a great bedside conversation, or maybe they didn't make it. And, all of those things can play into how they respond to what happens next.
So what kind of decisions become maybe especially important in blended family planning when it comes to the house? You kind of talked about a little bit, but bank accounts, retirement accounts, beneficiary designations, things like that.
Yes, absolutely. How title is held is a big one. And that's one where people think they know what they're doing, but then the documents don't support what they thought they did. And that's one of the most common things that I see come to me in probate or in litigation, where, we did this, we executed this was our goal, but now they're telling me that this is what's happening. And that's what we were trying to avoid. And it's like, well, yeah, the documents don't support what you were hoping to accomplish. So we have to kind of focus on that. So when people come to me proactively, I can check through everything, make sure that we're dotting those I's, crossing the T's. Um, Also, joint accounts and whether or not people are co-signers, authorized users, or co-owners, pay on death situations, transfer on death designations, who's on your retirement. One of the big ones that I see is when the beneficiary designation outlives the beneficiary.
Mhm.
And then it's like people thought they had beneficiary planning all set up and in place and effective, but if there's no beneficiary, then all those funds end up in probate anyway. And then you end up back in that court setting you were trying to avoid. So that's actually a lot of the probate issues that I have come up is people who tried to do it this way and then didn't account for some kind of issue that might arise, and then that happened, and now they're in probate and they don't want to do it. So,
Mm.
but it's too late.
So have you seen situations where the conflict after someone passes was not really about money or maybe just more about confusion, unclear expectations, or maybe those unfinished conversations that they weren't locked down?
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely see that. Um, I honestly don't think most of the litigation comes from greed or trying to get more than your fair share or anything like that. I honestly think the majority of litigation begins from miscommunications, lack of clarity, misunderstanding what we're trying to accomplish, not trusting that the person in charge is preserving their interests. Um, and conversations can really come back to cause a lot of drama because, like I said, the court's going to follow the documents. They're not going to care about the conversation that you had with dad a month ago or, 10 years ago, or what you guys talked about doing. If it's not in the documents, then the court might not enforce that, and nobody has to do it. You might still, if you have a good communicating executor or trustee, and that is a feasible outcome, and the executor or trustee believes and agrees with you, then it's not guaranteed that it's not going to happen, but there's no legally binding requirement for it. And when there's no legally binding requirement, that's when people start feeling insecure. And when people react out of insecurity, things can get really nasty fast.
So to put a bow on this, Miss Allison, what do you think surprises blended families the most once they finally sit down and start, talking through these decisions and all the things you were talking about, in a more clear manner?
Their relief. We are naturally conflict avoidant, most of us. And, sometimes we really postpone and avoid those tough conversations because we're not looking forward to the confrontation and the conflict that's going to come out of it. But when we're thinking along those lines, we're forgetting that when we sit down and we have those conversations and we use effective communication tools and we work and maybe even using a good mediator, then we can resolve those conflicts. So you might have to confront it, but you can resolve it. And that sense of feeling you get from a resolution is so fulfilling and rewarding. And estate planning can give that to you because you can have those conversations and then document everything appropriately and then save them from having to have that fight when you're not there to mediate it and you're not there to say, actually, no, that's not what I wanted. You're speculating or you're assuming or maybe that is what I wanted. I just didn't put it down. You're there to say that then. And when you're not there and you're not there to mediate, you're not there to be the voice of reason and they're just trying to guess what you want, that's where it gets ugly. I went through this a little bit with my husband's family when his mother passed. She had all her documentation in place. She had already prepaid and planned her funeral services, and it was wonderful. They had 3 things that they had to do for her services, and it was open the gravesite, get the date etched on the marker, and choose the color of flowers that go on the top of the casket. Now, the kids worked through it and they ended up picking it, but there was a brief argument about what color they wanted of the flowers on the casket. And I'm like, man, can you imagine if we had to pick all the decisions? So it's definitely something that is much better handled during life than leaving it to the kids to figure out later or leaving it to the spouse and kids to figure out later, especially if the spouse doesn't have that blood tie that you have and, may not have that long history with the kids and understanding how, your spouse, especially if your kids were grown when y'all got married, may not have seen the development of how your child reacts to information and how your child responds to situations to fall back on for understanding and empathy. And if they don't have that, then it can cause more conflict.
Wow. That's good stuff, Miss Allison. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Evan. I appreciate you being here.
That's it for today's episode of Dead But Not Gone, an estate planning podcast with Miss Allison Phillips. If you're ready to make thoughtful decisions about your future and create a plan that protects the people you love, visit bplestateplan.com to learn more. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, share the show, and leave a review as well. And we'll see you all next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.